So Millie Bobby Brown butted heads with the Duffer brothers on the topic of death. She said the Duffer brothers are two sensitive Sallys that don't want to kill anyone off. We need to be Game of Thrones, we need to have the mindset of Game of Thrones. And I think she was speaking in a general sense, but specifically I've seen a lot of people saying this about Max, that Max should have died at the end of season 4. And not killing her was kind of a cop-out. And there's two words that I always think of when I see statements like this. More mice. These two words sum up the sickness at the heart of every bad reboot you've ever seen, every dumb sequel, prequel, remake, every unwanted spin-off, every failed copycat. These words, this was a note given to a guy who had designed a character who would become enormously popular. This character. Mickey Mouse in Steamboat Willie was a gigantic hit, changed the course of the industry, revolutionized animation, and Walt Disney had all of these ideas he wanted to do, new types of stories to tell. He wanted to advance animation even further. He had envisioned a glorious future for this budding industry, but no, the head honchos rejected his project ideas, and what did they tell him they wanted instead? More mice. What a horrifyingly blind misunderstanding of the success of Mickey Mouse. Oh yeah, the public loves mice. New groundbreaking animation techniques? Boring. No, forget that, forget story, forget character, forget comedy, forget everything. Mice? That's what the audience clearly was most engaged by. And it wasn't even like more Mickey Mouse, just more mice. Ugh, what a nightmare. And Disney didn't make more mice, thankfully. He did make those other projects, and he did invent modern animation. But yeah, More Mice sums up that dumb mindset so sickeningly well. And unfortunately, it's a mindset that did not die with those higher-ups of Disney's. It continues to threaten everything we love in storytelling, and it feels like it's only gotten worse recently. Game of Thrones was a great show that fell victim to the curse of more mice. Game of Thrones' willingness to use death to facilitate its story was bold and brilliant and revolutionary, but then, especially as the show branched off from the books, death started to be used as a gimmick. Look at this. The fact that this article exists is a problem. It's an embarrassment. That's not something to be proud of. It's terrible. Death became so overused that the show suffered from the opposite of what Millie said. She talked about how there are now too many characters in Stranger Things. They couldn't even take a group picture. Game of Thrones had no characters left by the end. Half its good characters were killed off, and the other half was starved for any decent story whatsoever because they were stuck interacting with terrible, uninteresting, underdeveloped characters who couldn't carry a story. That's what Game of Thrones became. And that's what gets me annoyed whenever I see someone saying, our show needs to be X, our show needs to be Game of Thrones, whatever it is. But Game of Thrones did have some very good deaths. I think the topic is worth discussing. So what made those deaths so good? And forgetting for the moment what exactly Millie was referring to with her statement, can that way of doing deaths well, can that be or should that be what Stranger Things embraces? So here in my opinion are the very best deaths in Game of Thrones. Ned, Viserys, Drogo, and Shireen. What's going on with all these? So the thing with all these deaths is that they truly meant something. Ned's most of all, and Drogo's was similar. I don't know if everyone in our post-Game of Thrones world realizes, but these deaths shatter the genre. If a character had a death like this in a political drama, which Game of Thrones is by the way, but if it happened in a contemporary political drama, it would have been surprising maybe, but that is typical of political intrigue stories. But in fantasy, which everyone at the time still thought of as all about the Lord of the Rings type triumph of good over evil, a death of a Ned Stark is basically impossible within those confines. But no, not in this story. Not in Game of Thrones. We saw Ned Stark die, and from that moment on we felt like anything could happen. We were now outside the genre, we had no idea what to expect, because this particular genre of fantasy used to be or was thought to be so rigid. In reality it had evolved a lot by that point, but mainstream audiences didn't know that. But that thematic shift off of good beats evil towards this cruel, violent, amoral reality, that shift impacted us. And impacted the characters too. The realization of all of this on a conscious level for them changed the course of all of their trajectories. It shattered their worlds as well. This was a defining character moment for Daenerys, for Arya, for Sansa eventually, and for Joffrey too. This opened a door to new lows for the character, new levels of irredeemability. And that's the other side of the coin here, the choice to kill and the impact of that choice. These are defining moments for Daenerys and Stannis. These characters are different people before and after these scenes, both in terms of how we see them, in terms of how other characters see them. That is what makes them good deaths, when they bring meaning for the characters, for the world, for the themes, for our understanding of the genre itself in terms of what type of stories can be told. What makes death gimmicky is when deaths only have meaning external to the story. Think about the term shock value. That is an audience side term. That is us being shocked. If you're trying to make a scene more meaningful by injecting death, hoping that the weight of death itself, like on its own, independently as a concept, suddenly makes us attribute more meaning to a scene that had none on its own or little on its own, that is using death as a gimmick. We need something to give this scene some extra oomph. We need something to make this a water cooler moment. We need to make this gritty. We need to make this dark. We need to make it edgy. If that's where your head is at with character death, you are not thinking about what the scene itself needs. That is a cheap use of death. There's a series of comedy sketches called Rejected Pictures that plays on this exact phenomenon. It spells it out so well.
We'd like to see E.T. get killed at the end.
That's all.
What? We think movie audiences would really like it if the alien dies, so that the good guys, us humans,
win.
I recommend watching all these, they're all great. I'll link them in the description. Anyway, back to Stranger Things, let's talk about some hypothetical examples. Actually, let's use the Duffer brothers' own example first. They said, if you kill Mike, it's like, that's depressing. We aren't Game of Thrones, this is Hawkins, it's not Westeros. I think they're speaking to this exact point we just talked about. If the death is just there to generate the typical powerful emotions we typically get with deaths, and that's it, if the death has no meaning in the story, that's not what they want their show to be about. They want their water cooler moments to come from the story. I won't say Stranger Things is not into gimmicks.
Mouth breather.
Stranger Things absolutely does have gimmicks, but they're not into that particular one. They don't want death to just be something you do with a character you've run out of ideas for. But, that said, take a character like Steve. Steve absolutely should die. That would be such a big moment for him, it would be so meaningful. Steve's whole character is this peaked in high school type loser kind of, who finds meaning in his life through discovering his own bravery. That is the direction this character has moved in. He's not cool, he's becoming less and less cool as the story goes on. He cannot keep that esteem of his peers, but gradually that's become less important to him as he discovers what gives him a sense of his life's worth. And if we get a climax to his series-long character arc of sacrificing himself to save these nerds that no one cool cares about and no one will ever know about, sealing his life's meaning solely with bravery, forever foregoing popularity, that would be a perfectly fitting resolution for Steve. And I think you can make the same argument for Hopper. He lost his daughter and the grief destroyed him. Giving his life for 11 would be a glorious way for this character to rebuild what he lost. It would mean his value in life isn't the enjoyment that comes from living as a father with a family. His value is the selfless love of a father itself. It would isolate the love itself. Hopper is this character who tends to falter, sinks into this kind of gross, self-indulgent animal mode. When things aren't working out, he wavers back and forth from loser to hero, but ending as the hero, ending as the Hopper he is most proud to be, would be this declaration to reality that that's who he is, similar to Billy's death. So let's talk about Max. So what would her death in season 4 have meant? This is a character who's been convinced by the events of her own life that the world is a cruel and unfair place. If she died, it would kind of just be this yup moment. Yup, Max, you're right, the world is cruel. What does that mean? It wouldn't be this world-shattering moment like it is in Game of Thrones, because the season has already spent multiple episodes telling us, listen up, world's cruel. And even if we did get a brief reprieve from that with the running scene, if she ends up dying, it would just be a confirmation of an old idea, not a new paradigm of reality breaking through the rigid confines of a genre. And that's another point here, Stranger Things is horror. Killing characters is a genre staple. And even if you'll say from a character point of view, in story, it would be something world-shattering, and that would make it meaningful and worth it. I think this is what the Duffers mean when they say this is Hawkins, not Westeros. In Stranger Things, good does win in the end, and they don't have to keep up with that, but if they are going to deviate, what would be the meaning of that deviation? Could be there's an interesting, radically different direction to take a show like this, but you'd have to tell me what it is. I don't see it. Now, the fact is, we didn't get death, and also we didn't get happily ever after either. We got this weird in-between thing. Coma, plus maybe permanently blind, plus maybe permanently paralyzed. So if it isn't A or B, what is it exactly? So it's a pretty interesting move. It shows a real weighing of the pros and cons of killing characters. Because the decision you have to make with killing characters is it worth losing them forever for this one scene? That's what you're weighing, because once you kill them, we don't usually get more functionality out of them. That is it, they're done, the story moves on without them. And for the characters we mentioned, Steve and Hopper, yes, it is worth losing them forever for a death scene. Death would grant invaluable meaning to their story, meaning that you could not achieve any other way with anything less than death. With Max, yeah, they wanted the scene in the finale to pack a punch, they wanted oomph, and despite me talking down on that function a minute ago, that is something death can do. Death is exciting, it is engaging, it is one of the few elements you can inject into any scene, warranted or not, and it dependently does bring along its little suitcase of feelings and hands it over to the audience. But in terms of that function, very close to the effect of killing a character is other stuff involving similar levels of violence and gore. The gruesomeness of Vecna's curse does a lot of the same things death does. It's shocking, it's horrifying, it brings permanent effects like paralysis and blindness, and we get similar moments as we get from a death scene. This moment would be identical.
No, stay with me, Max. Hang on, just hang on. I got out.
So very similar functionality to a death scene in some respects. The main negative difference is death actually is permanent. And because of that, with anything less than death, we can't fully engage all of those juicy emotions because we know whatever it is can be reversed. And honestly, probably it will be reversed. So that is a big con. But there are good differences too. Death scenes at the end of the day are common. We've seen a lot of them before. They have to do a lot more work to change them up to make us interested each time we see a new one. But violently maimed scenes, there's a lot of creative space there that hasn't been nearly as well explored. It makes the scene feel fresh and interesting in a way a death scene wouldn't. And even if we don't get grief or loss, the power of that reaction, we do get another different equally strong emotion, suspense. We need to know what happens next. We need to know if Max is going to be okay. You do not get that particular emotion with most death scenes. And obviously the other benefit is you get to keep using the character. And especially with this interesting position they left Max in, this opens up entirely new ways this character can interact with the story's world, with the Upside Down. It opens up entirely new ways this character can interact with her friends. She's just in a completely different position with relation to them than she's ever been in. So they chose a fate for her that expands the story, not one that limits it, which is what happens when shows try to be Game of Thrones, as we see from Game of Thrones, who tried to be like itself and suffered from severely limited stories when it started running out of characters. So with that said, I think there's a balanced take to be found in Millie's criticism. Stranger Things undeniably does this thing where they try to have their ego and eat it too. Season 3, Hopper got a death scene and also got to live. Billy got a death scene but still keeps playing a role in the story due to Vecna. Like I mentioned in the last video, his death didn't prevent them from getting more functionality out of his character, out of his relationships. And you can't forget that they did this with 11-2 in Season 1. Almost everyone thought she was gone until the end of Season 2. And now Max gets the scene that functions like as 60% of a death scene but isn't really. You cannot deny that this show only kills side characters. It is starting to get very noticeable. And they apparently even plan on killing Steve in Season 1 and then back down. And again in Season 4, we got this pretty clear death setup for him with this monologue, and then seemingly they chicken out again. So waving these meaningful deaths in front of our faces and then not doing them, I totally agree that they're guilty on that count. Very valid criticism when it comes to those. Imagine if Ned Stark just got blinded and paralyzed and comified. No, you gotta bite the bullet on these scenes when they present themselves. They have presented themselves, and the Duffers have not bitten down hard enough. And I'll also grant that even if other character arcs aren't there yet, like Mike's, they could absolutely write the characters differently. They could create a way Mike's death would be meaningful and not just depressing. And I'd be down for that because good death scenes are good, and why wouldn't we want more of those? But just more death? Just this idea that they shouldn't be so sensitive, they gotta be more edgy? No, that I disagree with, and I cannot stand that way that Millie phrases it. You need to start killing people off, we need to be Game of Thrones, that just smacks to me of more mice. And, by the way, the have their ego and eat it too thing, I criticize that, but to be honest, it kinda works. They've had a lot of these fake out death moments that did mostly achieve the pros of the death scenes without the cons of losing the character. So I get that and I'm fine with it, especially when it's used for a character that should not die yet, like 11 or Max. So basically, to sum up my take, don't kill Max, don't kill other characters just for the value of an exciting death impact. Kill Hopper, kill Steve, kill anyone whose death would have meaning. Maybe Joyce, maybe she needs to go. And the fake out death stuff is mostly fine. So if you love a good juicy death as much as I do, click subscribe, join the We Love Death Club. What do you think about the Millie comment? Do you agree, disagree? Do you think Max should have died, or are you glad she lived? Very interested to see other opinions on this, so please do leave a comment. Support the channel on Patreon. Honestly, as I'm branching out and navigating the awkwardness of the YouTube algorithm's cruel discouragement of making literally any change to your content, I'm really thankful for the Patreon support, so big thanks to all of you. Shorts coming next week, subscribe for that, and thanks for watching.